Welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight on your brain and make some complex things a little more understandable. But before we do that, I have to go off on another rant.
Let me summarize last time real quick, and then we
Yeah.
rinse. Okay, so last time we went over a lot of population data on why I think that ideologies like critical race theory and all the variants that are coming out of academia now are actually part of the problem in the Black community, and I think it's on purpose. And my hypothesis that community is the tool for some people to grab some power. And we talked a little bit about the division between elites and social elites, not elites as in athletes or something like that, but social elites and the normal people, and how the way things are going, we think that it's actually going to increase the divide and create a whole generation of basically people who are uneducated and easily controllable. And in that, I showed a lot of incarceration rates, violent crime rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, in line with media representation of certain ideologies, as well as the timeline with certain movements and activist groups that came out, and how they all corresponded, and how they all the peaks and valleys seemed to go together. And in addition to that, and I don't think I made this part clear, I wanted to clarify with the summary, was that all those peaks and valleys were only changes in the Black community. And I think that's important because, again, it's the whole hypothesis that it is hello, kitty. Apparently, we were told that is a necessity for a good podcast, was cats jumping on people. And I don't have cats, and my dog would tear everything up. So, but again, supporting the hypothesis that these movements are being used to manipulate a whole group of people. And we're not blaming the victim, because they truly are a victim. They just don't know who the shooter is. And I think the target is wrong. So go back, check that one out, subscribe this one, tell your friends about us. Someone might like us. If you out of 1,000 people, 1 or 2 might like us. So,
Or at least
okay, now you can
tolerate
go
us.
on. Now you can go on your grumpy old
Well,
man rant.
that leads straight into my rant, because we wanted to make today a lighter, and it mostly will be when we get to it eventually. But there's some news that just really ticked me off.
Grinds your
I sent,
gears.
huh?
Grinds your gears.
Yes, grinds my gears. I sent you a link to I didn't want to bring up a bunch of links and stuff, and because I didn't want to spend that much time on it, so I just sent you a timestamped link to Louder with Crowder. Steven Crowder's a couple days ago did a deep dive on this and had a lot of links. And so if you've been paying attention to the news, you've seen there's been a lot of reporting on a rise in hate crimes against Asians. And one of the things that makes it so noticeable and makes it notable and noticeable is the fact that a lot of these are being filmed, by the perpetrators, as dumb kids are wont to do these days. Mm-hmm. There's also some that are on security footage. So it makes it more real when you can see it. Well, there's so much to be pissed off about this because it's mostly targeting older people, older Asian people who are being, the knockout game where you just run up and you sucker punch someone and knock them out, or being shoved down to the ground, being shoved into traffic, all this stuff. So that in and of itself will piss you off. But then the articles on this curiously don't talk about the perpetrators. More than that, some of them go to link this rise in hate crimes against Asians to the scourge of our day, which is white supremacy. In that Louder with Crowder link I sent you, he's got a clip of Nancy Pelosi on some stupid news show literally saying that this is the rise of white supremacy, except all of the perpetrators are Black or Middle Eastern. And so one of the many things that ticks me off about this is it's not new. The late great Dr. Walter Williams was writing about this a decade ago, about in Oakland, in Los Angeles, especially in these urban poorer areas where you have, you know, a large Black community, an established Black community, and then you have an Asian immigrant community, especially in high schools. There's a lot of violence between Black and Asians, and so this isn't new. One, two, it's obviously not white supremacy. Uh, but what really got my goat is, I think Dave Rubin was more right than he knew when he started calling the left, the self-proclaimed progressives, the regressive left, because this is incredibly regressive. Because one of the links there uh, in that clip is in one of these particular instances, the San Francisco district attorney declined to prosecute in the name of redistributive justice.
Well, where am I going to go with this? I think to tie it to the last week, Nancy Pelosi is a good name to put in there, because part of this whole process that we're trying to clarify for people is, we really think, and a lot of other people do, they're just not out there in front of you on the mainstream media, that they're creating the problem they wish to complain about. And if you want to talk about elites, there is no better example than, or very few better examples than Nancy Pelosi. Who benefits from this? Who benefits from the hatred? Who benefits from the division? She is in power purely because we're divided. Anybody who on the left reasonably takes a look at what she's done over the last however many decades she's been in office could not consciously vote for her. But because she's not the right, she stays in office with a very high degree of victory every time she runs, because her district is San Francisco, which we know where the leaning is there. So yeah, they create the problem with which they want to complain about. And again, it always comes back to white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. We saw the graphic of all of that term being used fivefold, tenfold at some points in time over the last 10 years. And that's where we see our regression in our social markers. And of course, all in those low socioeconomic class minority neighborhoods.
To me, it's more regressive than that, because,
Okay, so maybe you're going here, but I wanted to add, as we talked about last time, targeted at other groups, not in-group violence. Yeah. Okay, now go on.
Well, with my historical perspective, I think everything always, you have to go back 5,000 years for context. But here's what jumped out to me as regressive about this idea of redistributive justice. So if that sounds weird to anyone and doesn't make any sense, it's because it doesn't. But what it means is, well, because the Black community has been oppressed and has had injustices done to it in the past, which it undoubtedly has, we're going to ignore this little thing of elderly Asian people being assaulted and sometimes even killed. There have been some fatalities in these instances. We're going to ignore that in the name of equity and in the name of balancing the scales. Well, what the heck is that if not a blood feud? They have just legalized the blood feud, which is a millennia old concept that goes all the way back to when, I mean, it undoubtedly predates nations. It undoubtedly predates city states. That this is pure tribal, is you did something, not to me, but and not you even, but you did something to your grandfather did something to my grandfather, so I have the right to take it out on you. That's one of the reasons I'm wearing my I Miss Abe shirt from any idea where this is from?
No.
It's from the Lincoln Library and Museum in Springfield. So one of the kind of counterfactual thought exercises of history is what would have happened in Reconstruction if Abraham Lincoln hadn't been assassinated, because so much of his truncated second term, including his second inaugural, was all about the better angels of our nature, of reconciling this seemingly unreconcilable difference of the North and the South, and bringing America back together to preempt what came, which was the resentment within the South of the North and of the Civil War, and that was cut short. And here we are 150 years later, as if none of that had ever happened, as if no progress had ever happened, and we're going all the way back to the blood feud, that somebody did something to somebody's ancestor, so they get to take it out on completely unrelated people.
This is actually going to tie right into our fitness lecture, and I wasn't going to go this way. So those that are interested in the fitness, listen for this later. But one of the things I do talk about with people is everybody wants a balanced program, a balanced program. Well, my program isn't balanced because life isn't balanced. And so when I get a client that sits at a desk all day or drives 2 hours to get to work or something like that, I can't have a balanced program by the numbers, or else they're going to continue to perpetuate their imbalance, because they're getting exactly as much in the direction of their imbalance as they are against it when we're talking movement patterns. So bad posture and things like that. So my program isn't balanced. And I think when we're dealing with inequities of the past, inequality of the past, I'm gonna parse those words, inequality of the past, we do have to have a slight imbalance. But there's two ways to go about it. You got the Kinsey approach, which is only current discrimination will make up for past discrimination, which you end up in a cycle because he continues that with future discrimination will rectify current discrimination, which now you've got a bad pattern. That would be like me cutting your pectoral muscles because you have adaptive foreshortening. We don't want to cut the pectoral muscles to give you good posture. With chest muscles, for those that don't know what the pecs are, but they pull you forward if you sit that way a lot, like I am now, because I'm sitting on actually a bench right now instead of my office chair because we have some construction going on. And if we lose connection, all of a sudden we might have to clip that together. So that's a sidebar. If that happens and things get weird for a second and you all of a sudden come back to a different conversation with everybody different, that's what happened because they're working on the room that has the Wi-Fi in it. So, but again, your pecs, your pec minor, pec major, pull you in to a slumped shoulder position, and they get tight and they're very strong. And if they're tight and very strong, they're going to want to stay there. And so you need your back muscles to be able to counter that and pull you into a good posture position, as well as just self-awareness to make sure you're always doing that and reinforcing the movement. But you have two options on how to correct that. You can either cut the pecs in half and all of a sudden back muscles win, which is the current anti-racist approach, versus strengthening the back muscles by doubling up on the efforts within reason, because we got dose response, but within reason, doubling up on the efforts, and then just making an environment where those pecs want to relax. And so there's a developmental, oh, this is Glenn Lowry, the bias approach to racial issues versus the developmental approach. Do we build them up to be equal, or do we take a bias approach and blame the other side? It's not the pec's fault you have foreshortening. It's your posture and your lack of strength on the other side that you have bad posture. And that's the approach we're trying to bring forward as a third alternative.
Something I just thought of while you were running off on your little rant there of which way do we approach this? Obviously, there was inequality and injustice in the past, but how are we going to address it? And one of the things that in my bizarre and broken brain, I jumped to baseball, because that's how my brain works. But if you watch Ken Burns' baseball documentary, which maybe I'll rant on at some point because there are some problems there, but One of the people he has speaking a lot is a man by the name of Buck O'Neill. And I wish I had watched this when it came out, because about the time it had come out, I had kind of gotten bored with baseball, even though I'd played it since I could walk. And Buck O'Neill rekindled my love for the game through his enthusiastic love for the game. And why am I talking about this? Because Buck O'Neill was a black man from the South, I think from Florida. So really deep segregation and injustice. This is a man who uh, obviously had to deal with segregation. He talks about it at times during the documentary. He played in the Negro Leagues, and he ended his career managing the Kansas City Monarchs. And yet, when he talked about the game, this at the time he was 70 something years old, and yet he was like a 12-year-old with this huge smile, with just pure love for the game, even though he could have been bitter. He could have been bitter about the fact that he didn't get to play in the major league. He was relegated to the Negro League, and to the injustices of segregation there. He could have been bitter. And yet when he talked about Babe Ruth, he was suddenly a 12-year-old again, talking about the excitement of watching him hit home runs, or hearing about him hit home runs. That dichotomy there of, yes, I suffered injustice, but you know what? It doesn't take away from the pure enjoyment of what I think is the greatest game ever invented. That and it wasn't something he had to explain. It was just something he was. It was just something he portrayed. To me, that's how you deal with it. You acknowledge it, but you don't let it create bitterness and destroy what is good.
Well, that
Yes.
also allows you to account for and celebrate the changes that have been made.
Mhm.
80, like we went through that timeline. Civil Rights Acts in the 60s, 70s, still very racist. 80s, still very racist. No policy involved, but people so racist that group in the number twos on our little list, 4-point list of people who are supporting the movement right now, that they would be correct. It is so prevalent that it might as well be systemic. And 80s, little less so in the 90s, and then we see that curve, all that right at the beginning of the 2000s, those curves just turned around. And we had a lot of things that went along with that. We had the civil rights movement in the 60s. We had the women's rights movement, the first and second wave feminism in the 80s and 90s, the gay rights movement right on the end of that. And these are all successful movements, and rightly so. And all of those things combined, plus just every generation being a little bit better on the way. And we turned that corner. We hit that curve where everything was going to good, and it was a sharp drop to good. Credit to us 80s kids, and even somewhat to the millennials, but we got a problem with them that we could talk about later on how they're handling it now. But somewhat to the millennials, on we're the generation that became adults when that curve was starting to go the other direction. And then we also are the generation that are probably the people that need to do the most right now to rewrite the ship, because we're the ones that did it right. But yeah, appreciation for that progress, and acknowledging the fact that even though the policies ended in the 60s, people were still shitheads, and then
And always will
progressively
be.
better. And always will be. There will be. But at the same time, we just look at the violent crime numbers as a good indicator of how bad people can be. We were down to like 1.2% of the population were willing to commit a violent crime at all.
Mhm.
And that's all the way down to just property damage. So 99 out of 100 people aren't willing to do the bad thing. And now we're getting close. We've almost doubled that since 2010. So now we've doubled the number of people that we come across that are willing to do the bad thing. let's get back down.
Yes, let's. Well, I think that's, I mean, I could go on and on because I have more thoughts that keep bumping into my head here, but
Yeah, let's,
I
I guess, stay a little bit on task. I'm going to make one political commentary, but it leads into our fitness discussion.
yes.
One of the current debates that people keep trying to drag me into because of my profession and my willingness to speak my mind, which is let's do more of that, people, is the debate on obese people being put to the front of the line for the COVID-19 vaccine because of the comorbidity that goes along with being obese. They are of one of the top categories of what causes negative effects from COVID-19. So there's two camps, as usual. We got two tribes. One, no, it's their own fault. They shouldn't be put to the line for something they had 100% control over. And the other side that says, well, we got to go by the numbers. More die there, so we're just trying to get total death down. And as usual, everybody hates me because I have a third opinion. The third opinion that almost goes with that second group, but then they hate me with the second part of the answer is put them to the front of the line because the numbers do say we will prevent more deaths. That's fine. The numbers do say we will prevent more deaths. And the goal right now in the middle of a crisis, a black swan event, is to keep the numbers down as much as possible. Put them to the front of the line, fine. But that has to have a second part. We need to use this as an event that says, hey, guess what? Let's be healthier as a nation. So when this happens again, because we will have another event like this, we have a better outcome in the future. One of the big comparisons everybody wants to make that are on the freedom side is, look at Sweden, they were completely open and they had less deaths. But also look at Sweden, they're quite a bit more healthy than we are. Their obesity rates are way lower than ours. Their activity levels are way up. They get outside, they walk, they ride their bikes, they eat healthier. So now let's take this tragic event and instead of piggybacking a bad policy on top of it to divide a nation, say, hey, this is how we can actually be healthier as a nation. Which there's a lot of side effects to that will continue on, including the mental health of the nation, the productivity of the nation, healthcare costs would go down if we just became a healthier nation, because insurance in and itself is sharing risk. And if you share risk with people with higher outcomes, you will increase the cost. So all of these secondary effects would be solved, not solved, but made better, more right. Like we've been saying, less wrong, more right. If we just made a push to be a healthier nation and got a good information in the process, which we have not had good information in the process. But yeah, we can't say no now, because we would be post hoc putting a limit on something we've been supporting for the last 20 years with the body positivity movement. So again, postmodern, ruining everything they touch. Body positivity, big is beautiful. What?
Ruining everything and literally hurting people.
And people.
Yep. And this is something that has boggled my mind for years, is how is it that on the one hand, we have food deserts and a food crisis in America, but we have an obesity epidemic. This has been going on for, at least 10 years that I've been going, wait a minute, you literally can't have both of these at the same time.
This is a testament to how good we have it in America. Our poorest people are our fattest people. That is the opposite. This is the definition of a first world problem, because it is the opposite of any other of any third world country or less developed country. Because if you're poor, you don't eat. If you're poor here, you just don't get fancy vegetables. This is the definition of a first world problem. And again, I think that's an excuse that the people that are part of the problem keep perpetuating too. You can eat healthy on a budget. And that should be a big push. If you want to give me a social program that I would get 100% behind, it would be education on how to eat healthy on a budget. I lost 80 pounds eating nothing but beans and rice for 4 months. Why? Because I wanted to lose weight? No, I wanted a hamburger, but I was poor. I was making minimum wage, working 2 jobs, and all I could afford was beans and rice. So there you go. It's not health. That's not the healthiest way. By the way, I never give that advice when
Yes.
someone's trying to lose weight. I never give that advice. That's not the healthiest way. It just happened for me. But again, poor wasn't the excuse.
Right.
So
Well, just speaking anecdotally, I was at my fattest when we were on food stamps because it's easy to buy junk when you're not the one paying for it, and when there's no restrictions. There are no restrictions on what you, and it's getting worse because you'll see EBT, which is food stamps. It's the little debit card for food stamps. You see that in a growing number of places of EBT accepted, and I'm like, wait a minute. The point of this is to help households, poor families buy their monthly groceries. Why do you need to accept that at a convenience store, at a gas station, where you're not buying groceries, you're buying crap?
well, this is anecdote, but this is a person. This is my lived experience. I was at a convenience
Your
store.
truth.
My truth.
Yes.
Yes. I was at a convenience store, and the person in front of me would be she was quite a bit larger than is healthy, and she had another unhealthy habit. She was apparently a heavy smoker, but she had a stack of chips and candy bars and et cetera, the kind of food you can get in a convenience store that isn't healthy. And she paid for it with her Lone Star card, which is our food stamps here in Texas. She paid for it with her Lone Star card. And then I was about to step up because I thought she was done. But then she pulled a wad of cash out of her pocket and bought 12 cartons of cigarettes. For anybody that buys cigarettes, you know how expensive 12 cartons of cigarettes is. That's a paycheck for a lot of people right there. And I might have opened my mouth on that occasion, but that again, this food stamps should be part of the process with food stamps, probably should be how to spread your money in a more healthy way, because that convenience store shopping is also more expensive than going to a regular supermarket or whatever. And again, programs that address the actual problems. Okay, there's not enough grocery stores in poor neighborhoods where people take buses instead of having a car to drive 20 minutes. That is actually a problem. I'm fine with that. Let's find a way to incentivize local business, local grocery businesses to come out and have their wares, because it is hard to get that distribution power like an HEB or Kroger or an Albertsons or whatever's in your area. Has Walmart all over the country. It's hard to get that distribution power. So if you can, some sort of government subsidy in that direction, I would be behind. But just throwing money at people and saying make your own choices, that's been part of the problem. So again, where's your compassion go? Where's your safety net going to be? Is it going to be in a productive way, or is it going to be in a way that it just makes you feel good at night? Throw some money at people and then expect them to make good decisions without a good education on the subject. And it's a perpetuating problem, because one parent that didn't know what to do raises kids that don't know what to do, that raise kids that don't know what to do, that raise kids. We keep going on the same path.
Right. Well, rather than me going on my grumpy old, increasingly libertarian rant on the subject, let's lead that into, okay, well then, how does one get healthier through their own initiative? And let's talk about some of the basics of health and fitness. And I will occasionally jump in to rant about some of the dumb things I see at the gym that I go to.
Yeah, we do have different exposures right now, because I owned a gym for a while and I worked in one of the big box gyms way back early in my career, as well as a different kind of an in-between facility. But right now, my training experience is people I have already on a schedule, and it's kind of exclusive. So I'm really delegated to just just the correct stuff right now, or as mostly correct as we can get, where Heath gets to go to a big box gym and see people perpetuating the Instagram insanity as they go. So now we have to navigate the fitness industry.
Excellent.
It is, as with other subjects we've talked about, a cesspool of misinformation hidden behind small truths here and there, and kind of a cluster F of trendy marketing, we'll say. One of the first golden rules is, what are they trying to sell me? And as we talked about with the lower income, obviously, if you're coming to me, you can afford me. So we're trying to give a little advice that you can take on the road to a gym, and even look at stuff on Instagram or YouTube or any of these things, and kind of assess for yourself what is possibly good, what is possibly bad.
Well, this is a practical example of the philosophical ideas that we've been talking about.
Mhm.
Because
and the biggest part of it is taking a step back and looking at the big picture, not that one cool thing or that one fact that's thrown at you.
And having a healthy dose of skepticism about what you're being told. And by healthy dose, I mean not just the irrational skepticism of rejecting everyone and everything, but just asking questions, asking, the big one being why. You know, I know I'm talking to someone who's coachable if I give them some tips, some advice, and they ask why. If they ask, you know, follow-up questions to that extent, I know I'm talking to someone who's coachable, because they have that kind of mind.
And if you're talking to somebody who's giving you advice, whether you're paying them or not, or they're trying to get you to pay them, doesn't mean discount them if they're trying to get you to pay them, because that's their job. People do things for a living. But if they can't answer why, so there's two parts to this. If they can't, I'm sorry, I'm lower. Two parts to this. If they can't answer why, or they refuse to answer why, then it's already no. It's already a no-go. If they can't answer why, this is the second part, but they're willing to say, you know what? I don't know that exact answer, but I know where to look, and I'll get back to you. That is also acceptable. So if you ask them a specific question and they don't know that specific answer, that's okay. That's what books are for. We can't memorize everything. But as long as they have the golden rule, the base facts down, the anatomy and all that stuff, and they can answer why, or they're willing to answer why, whether it's right now or later, that's number one. The second part is take a step back and look at the big picture, because the fitness industry, for as long as I can look back in the history of fitness, has its tribes as well. And they all have good things about them. But at the same time, when they become tribal, they go to an extreme, or they tend to discount the good things about the other tribes out there. A good example would be the fight between bodybuilders and powerlifters. Bodybuilding, obviously you can tell just by the shape of the participants, they're different. And how they just by the way they look, they're obviously different. Now, some of that's genetics. People tend towards powerlifting if they tend to be big, giant, and strong, and people tend towards bodybuilding if they tend to be pretty big but also lean. So you've got the genetic tendency, but as far as the fight, which is better, they tend to tout their good points, but then discount the other parts of it that are bad. Or a marathon runner versus one of those two guys. You know, a power lifter walking up the stairs is going to die, whereas a marathon lifter can't help you move very well. Marathon runner, because they're not very good at picking up a couch. So right. You know, I'm using extremes for my examples, but
well, and it's a good illustration of another way. This is a practical example of the stuff we've been talking about, which is get away from the false dichotomies. Very rarely do you have, because life is complicated, so very rarely do you have a choice between two extremes where it must be this, where it must be that. Well, no, it depends.
Well, let me say that depends. Like, I got good advice a long time ago in my career, and it was, you can always answer it depends, but just be prepared to say why. So that's a little offshoot of based off what you said. But I'm going to put a little caveat on this. If you want to be a power lifter, obviously you should go work towards powerlifting. If you want to be a bodybuilder, you should follow the advice of the great bodybuilders. If you want to run a marathon, you have to do the training process involved with running a marathon. If you want to be competitive, it's even more extreme in all of those. So the more you want to do something, the more you have to shift that way, and the more competitive you want to be, the more extremely you have to shift that way. Just understand that there's trade-offs.
Yep.
And so back to our point of health, and specifically my specialty is health with aging, is being a high performance human while you age. For those that are on my social media, you saw me post my picture of my client that just turned 60 this year. And that was right after we did 2 rep sets of 315 bench and a full weightlifting workout, which I do train him a little bit more in a bodybuilder style because of his preference. But at the same time, he's 60 years old, doing well because we do the right things along the way. And you can't go to any of those extremes because all those extremes have trade-offs. And so we're gonna start this with a balanced approach, and then I'll talk about individuality after that, and specificity after that. So this is your intro to specificity. We'll go into it after we cover the basics. So the textbook answer to the 5 elements of fitness is pretty good. I'm going to add a 6th one at the end, but the 5 elements of physical fitness are muscular strength, muscular endurance, cardiovascular endurance, flexibility and mobility, which are different things, and then body composition. And most people in the audience probably are most concerned with body composition because that's the aesthetic. That's the, I look in the mirror and I feel better about myself. I'm getting to a healthy weight. And for most of America, that's the #1 consideration, because we are in a large part at an unhealthy weight with fat mass. Then the 6th one I'd like to add is a mental component. Some coaches are calling it mindset or mindfulness. I call it mind-body connection, because they go together. It's not just your brain. It's how your brain interacts with your body and your body interacts with your brain. And that's what got me on the neurobiology route a few years ago, because I figured out that kind of was the missing link with people who are having trouble. So
just be careful, because that has become a buzzword now.
well, that's why I use the ones they said, and how I disconnect from that, because mindset has been a buzzword. And I'm going to give credit though, because a lot of people using it as a buzzword are actually correct about what they're saying. Now they miss the connection with the body. They think it's just getting your mind right, or your mental health. I'll say with the ones that go off the rails are the ones that are the ones that teach you to look inward too much, whereas inward versus how it affects your body and how it associates with the people around you and the society around you is different than just reflecting on yourself all the time. And it also leads to the things, just do you,
Yeah.
or treat yourself.
Yeah.
I do notice a pattern of people that tend to treat themselves a lot more often than they have earned in their life with their productivity and stuff. So there's a difference between the treat yourselves and the mind-body connection. So
right. Yeah. Because a coach or a trainer is just that. They are not a cognitive behavior therapist.
No, but what they really should hammer, and I think this is where the missing link was being present in the moment. If you're picking up a 400-pound deadlift from the floor, you shouldn't be thinking about your grocery list later. Mm-hmm. You should be feeling the tension of the bar, setting your core, feeling your breathing, ready for that moment. So being in the moment is probably the first step. And a lot of people actually take a lot of training to get to that step because they can't, they're the ones that lay awake at night thinking of their next day, which is also important because if you develop good habits in that regard, you're going to sleep better.
Yeah.
You know, if you develop good habits in that regard, you're going to drive better because you're thinking about where you're at. You know, you're going to be more in the moment when you're having personal interactions with people. How many times are you talking to somebody and you could tell their mind somewhere else? It's kind of annoying if you have an important point. Might save a few marriages. I don't know. But it definitely in the gym, if I put a bar on your back and you've earned your way to be lifting a decent amount of weight that has a risk to it, you probably should be in the moment. Most injuries happen when somebody just does something without thinking. I've seen more injuries in the gym between exercises than actually doing an exercise. One guy at our 24-hour fitness lost his finger because he just dropped the weights without looking to his side. And there was another set of weights there and his finger ended up in between them. So being in the moment, paying attention to your surroundings, not running into people, not thinking of things that aren't where you're at right now, and actually focusing on your breathing, focusing on how your technique is, and then actually thinking about what you're doing in the movement goes a long way to, I think that's a good step for a lot of people who have these issues in the rest of their life, taking a step back and taking that distracted mindset out of their day. All right. There's five elements. Muscular strength. This is the power lifters realm, right? So muscular strength, your boy Mark Ripito says base strength is the most important aspect of fitness. Well, he's kind of right and wrong. I would say he's wrong that it's the most important because of the five, there is no most important in general. But where he's kind of right is it often is the most ignored. And so if you were to send a message, a lot of people are lacking that in their training and they need to take time to focus on that.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people have this apprehension about strength training because when they hear the term, they think, well, I don't want to look like the mountain or a bodybuilder or an offensive lineman. Like, that's not what strength training is. You're trust me, you're not going to look like one of those guys if you do some strength training.
Yeah, you need a little bit of genetics there. Some of them a little bit enhanced genetics. And then again, they're spending time going to that extreme, and they're spending a lot of time going to that. That's a full-time job for these people. So going to the gym 3 hours a week or 4 hours a week is not going to give you that result, even if you specifically train for that. So,
right.
So there's a lot of extremes there, and we can't let the extremes determine our view of what we want. But we do need muscular strength because being stronger physically is it's injury prevention in and of itself. If you reach down to pick up a case of water, but you could barely pick up that case of water, you're at a high risk of injury. The number one cause of a nursing home stay is not an illness. It's the fact that it's someone's 1 rep max to stand up. So they've stood up, they've done all the work they can do. Now, let alone walk around, use the bathroom, and interact with other people. And the third part of muscular strength is it gives you confidence. So if you're a strong person, automatically your mind becomes a little bit more confident on top of that. So, and it's just helpful if you got to do something and you can't rely on, you're unreliant on other people. So if I've got to put, I remember the day I put a washing machine in the back of my truck by myself. I just reached down, deadlifted it, put it in the truck, and I looked across the street and there was some neighborhood walkers going around and they were just sitting there like, but otherwise in that same exact situation, I would have had to call a friend, wait for them to get there if they had time, and then do the job, hour, 2 hours, day later. So
yeah, and the point being that you're not often going to have to lift a washing machine on your own, but you do need that base level of strength. Another buzzword in the fitness industry that gets annoying is functional training. Okay, well, I don't know when I'm going to have to row 120 pounds or, you know, do a pull up since I'm not having to pass a marine fitness test. But that that base level of back strength is what lets me bend down and pick something up without throwing my spine out of whack. And how often a day do you have to bend down and pick something up?
And nobody wants to be dependent on other people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're not physically strong, you at some point in your life will have to depend on somebody else who is. The next one, we'll just keep moving through these and then we'll put it all together. Muscular endurance, different than muscular strength. And it's different than cardiovascular endurance. There are different kinds of endurance. And I'm not going to do a bioenergetics lecture here, but there are different kinds of endurance. But for this purpose, we'll break it down aerobic and anaerobic. Anaerobic is not needing oxygen, right? And that's where your local muscle endurance is really kind of how we categorize that, because it's too quick for your aerobic system to kick in and be your primary source of energy. Now, obviously there's interplay through all of those. Again, not a lecture here, but we're talking about just the immediate muscle stores. What's already there, what you can use right now without any preparation. And so now you're looking at your high rep sets, your sets of 15, 20, getting that burn. When you feel the burn, that's lactic acid building up, and lactic acid is a byproduct of the anaerobic system. So lactic acid builds up as you use more of that energy. You burn the sugars that are directly stored in your body. And the more you train in that muscular endurance realm, you have two effects. Your body starts storing more of that in the muscle, which we'll get to the health benefit of that. This is one of the big ones for me in the current climate of health. But the other part is you get better at processing that lactic acid. So your body gets better at clearing it, sending it to the liver to go through its cycle to basically use those byproducts for good instead of just building up acid in your system. So you have two effects there. One, you just store more energy, and the other is you get better at clearing out the bad stuff. So because your body shuts down when you go to a failure set and you're going and going and going, and that burn builds up, and all of a sudden you got nothing. That's because that acid built up to a certain level. It shut off all the enzymes that are responsible for that energy. And so when the enzymes aren't working for that energy, you're not going to produce anymore. And if you didn't get to an aerobic state before that, you're done. Your body just going to not work till it clears all that out. So you get better at both of those things, storing it up and letting it out.
You started talking about witchcraft and enzymes, and my brain shut off.
Well, and this is a disconnect. This is a disconnect between a creator and an applicator. So I create a lot of this because I have the underlying anatomy, physiology, bioenergetics background, whereas Heath came into it learning the process of doing it without that background. So you've got a creator and a propagator almost at this point.
Plus, you were always the chemistry nerd, and I hated chemistry. I'm a physics nerd, so I like the biomechanics because it makes sense to me.
Well, I like the biomechanics because I like math, but at the same time, the chemistry is great because it's fascinating. It's the part that puts it all together and makes everything make sense. But it's also fascinating because the speed at which these processes happen in our body are lightning quick, and it's not electrical. It is a chemical going from your brain down your spine to where it's supposed to go and releasing other chemicals that create all these action potentials and polar bonding and everything, and your finger twitches. And it happens.
The one thing I will add is, because I see all this dumbness in the box gym I go to, it does drive me crazy that people do one or the other. I very, very rarely see anyone blending muscular strength and muscular endurance.
Mhm.
It's always either, it's what we get in trouble too, because we're misogynist pigs and we talk about the chick workout, the girl workout. Well, there is a mirror image of that, which is the bro workout,
Mhm.
which is the
Sit, sit,
I'm just
sit. Yeah.
I'm gonna pack on weight so that I look buff and cool and do half reps to get strong. And then there's the girl workout of I don't want to bulk up, so I'm just gonna sit here with the 5 or 10 pound dumbbells and do a bunch of stuff. It's not one or the other,
Should I tell
folks.
the irony there?
Yes.
One of the reasons CrossFit was so successful for women is because it encouraged them to work hard. That's number one. That's number one. But then you add to it a secondary effect is women respond very well to high volume. Volume is the amount over time you do. And volume training is your higher rep stuff. Now, adding the intensity like CrossFit did exploded now I have other issues with CrossFit, but it exploded the female progression in the strength training world. And it was empowering in that, and I'll give them credit for that. But we'll go over we're just talking about good stuff for now.
Yes.
Right? Now on the health benefit of that high volume training, though, the lactic acid, the anaerobic training, you're storing more sugar in the muscles. So there's a huge benefit here, because one of the biggest problems in modern US society right now is the diabetic epidemic. So we are becoming more and more diabetic over time because we have high sugar diets readily at our disposal, and we're developing what's called insulin insensitivity. Insulin is the hormone that causes your muscles to open up and let sugars into them instead of being in your bloodstream. It's like the insulin receptor is like a doorman in a nightclub, and the insulin itself is like that promoter that gets people into the nightclub. They go together, they shake hands, and then all the people that's with the promoter go into the nightclub. But at some point, that happens so much. There's the doormen just say, "No, I've seen you before. We've been down this road. Move on to the next one." And your whole body starts to do that, and you get what's called insulin resistance, which is type 2 diabetes. The worse that is, the worse your case of type 2 diabetes is. So you're not taking in sugars into the muscle cells. It's floating around in your bloodstream, and that causes all kinds of problems to the blood vessels themselves. And we're going to keep this simple, but eventually you end up with toes chopped off and your foot chopped off and your heart having issues and all that stuff. So insulin resistance is a negative. And if you encourage your muscles to want more glycogen, which is the sugar, as your body converts it into the cell itself, you're already combating that. So again, muscular endurance training. There's one more benefit that's really important: tendon density, muscle tendon density. So how dense the connective tissue is, that's best trained in those high rep sets. So it takes time and a lot of work for those to develop, because they develop more slowly than the muscular strength itself. So it's important to include that, even if you want to be strong, or even if you want to have a lot of cardiovascular endurance without injuries along the way. So injury prevention, we spend a lot of time in those high rep sets. It's one of the keys to why I've had a long history of healthy athletes, and healthy athletes that end up performing well, even though we put performance aside for a minute, because I spend a lot more time in that prep phase, which is a higher rep phase, than most trainers do with their athletes, because they want them to throw 100 miles an hour right off the bat. But I want their shoulder to be able to handle throwing 100 miles an hour before they are throwing 100 miles an hour. So that's number 2, muscular endurance. Number 3, cardiovascular endurance. That's the go-to when people have their New Year's resolution and say, "Oh, I gotta get in shape." Tie on some shoes, go for a run. Nike's done a good job of perpetuating that. All you have to do is put on your shoes and go for a run. Put on your shoes and go for a run. It is important. We need our cardiovascular endurance. There's a dose response to it, however. So, but we're going to stay with positive for now. So cardiovascular endurance, you've got your things that make you breathe hard for a long period of time. That's the easiest way to describe it. Your cardio zone, when you see something in the gym, it is the typical heart rate that most people can handle for a long period of time to get the benefit. Don't go into fat burning zone. That's buzzwords right there. But when you're in that cardio zone, you are doing the right pace to improve that system. So you're increasing the amount of blood your heart pumps in any given beat. So when it pumps, we call it cardiac output. The cardiac output is how many times it pumps and how much it pumps out each time is the total volume. Now you get that too high, you're not in your cardio zone anymore because you're pumping faster than the heart can fill back up. So at some point you reach a response where you're not getting any more blood than you would at a lower rate. There's an optimal rate where it's pumping as fast as it can, but yet still fill back up. And when you can get that to basically a strong pump with the right pace to refill, that's when you're having your maximum cardiac output. So that's our goal there. And again, that cardiac zone isn't as high as you can get. Interval training is different, but the cardiac zone isn't as high as you can get. Let me pause you for a second. All right, everybody, sorry for that cut. We have some home renovations going on and we had a slight little emergency. So all taken care of. Dogs are out back and hopefully not going to run around the neighborhood. Okay.
I do want to interject there, since we have a, a bit of a pause here, that you mentioned about the cardio being people's New Year's resolution and whatnot. But ultimately, the goal of basically everyone who wants to get into fitness is, I want to look better naked. Okay. So keep that in mind when we get to number 5 of body composition. Is don't fixate on any one of these. The whole point is they all go together and they will help you, blending together, help you with that ultimate goal of, I want to look better naked.
So that was, second benefit of cardiovascular endurance is on the cellular level, your body gets better at processing. It increases the mitochondrial density, which is where the aerobic system goes through its the electronic transport chain, and basically uses those same glycogen molecules, which again are the carbohydrate sugar molecules that are stored in the cell for aerobic respiration, which is highly efficient. So you're looking at, if you look at units of energy, I'm not going to name the chemicals, but if you look at units of energy through the glycolytic process, you're getting about a net of 2. Where if you look at an aerobic process from that exact same sugar molecule, you get a net gain of 30. So 30, 32. I can't remember the exact number, but that was 10 years ago in school. But much more. That's the important part. The rest is what books are for. But there's a good and bad to that. The good is you got really good at something. So if you're talking about being efficient and having a good use of your body's energy to do a lot of work, that's a good thing, because you're going to be able to do more work throughout your day and recover faster from each set of exercise. So again, playing into those strength and your muscular endurance sets, if you recover faster between sets, you're going to be able to do more work. So that's a good benefit. The other part of it, though, is you become more efficient at using a little bit of energy. So if your goal is body composition, to lose fat, the more efficient you become, the less actual stored energy you're going to use to do any individual task. So you've got a good and bad to that. So it does use more fat as a fuel source, which is a correct thing that would be said by a lot of trainers. But at the same time, you get better at not using a whole lot of energy. So you turned your sports car into a Prius. And now you can go all day on a little bit of gas, but if you're trying to lose the gas that's stored all over your body, you can actually end up shooting yourself in the foot by only doing cardio. So again, looking at the interplay. Now the last one is body composition. All those other 4. Oh, no, we didn't go flexibility. Flexibility.
Mobility, yeah.
Mobility, flexibility. Difference between mobility and flexibility is passive. So if I reach down to touch my toes, that's flexibility. If I lift my leg up to my head, that's mobility. So what I can create in space is mobility. Which is more important? Yes. Uh,
Yeah,
so
again, these are not either ors. There's a reason why when I worked at a box gym, uh, they put little profiles of the trainers up on the walls, and one of the things they wanted was a quote, and I was like, and then I realized, you know what, my personal philosophy is also going to be my professional philosophy, which comes from the great economist Dr. Thomas Sowell. There are no solutions, only trade-offs.
only trade-offs. Yep. And when we put these together, that's what we're going to get to. And I'm going to try to do it in 15 minutes because I have a noon client here. So if not, we'll have to piggyback with a part two. But body composition is your fat to muscle to bone to organ ratio in your body. And usually when we address that, it's fat to muscle because those are the two things that are going to change the most with training. I could go a whole hour on bone density alone, but even if you increase your bone density by quite a bit, it's not going to increase or change your body composition by that much as a total. But it's usually your fat to muscle ratio, and body composition takes on many forms. So it's all about the ratio versus the actual size. These big giant power lifters that look fat are healthier than someone who's too skinny but doesn't have any muscle. So that ratio, that interplay is going to be important in the energetics that involve your blood sugar levels, your cholesterol levels, and everything. And fat in itself can become an immune response organ if you get to a certain level because it has an inflammatory response as a whole. So someone who is obese past a certain point has an autoimmune response from in their body from the fat, an inflammatory response from the fat itself. So we do want to have a good ratio there. And if you have too little fat, now you mess your body up in a lot of other ways. So this is one place where you look at extremes where we can bring in bodybuilding. Bodybuilding, they're sitting at, for your males, competition about 1 to 2% body fat. And even in the off season, they're about 5 to 6% body fat. If they're smart, they jump that over 7 to 7 or 8, because under 7, you're starting, for most people under 7%, you're starting to have a different environment in your body with your hormone production and stuff like that. What people don't realize about hormones is they're made of cholesterol and proteins. So if you want to have the cholesterol debate, well, there's also a too low as well as a too high. So there's a too high, and we can have that debate, or you can't just cut it out, because then you can end up in a situation where you're too low. And that's what happens as you get to a certain body fat percentage, because your body can make its own cholesterol out of what you have in store. And for your females, that's higher because of, are we allowed to talk about differences between male and female anymore?
I mean, we've said so many things that will get us banned. We might as well.
Wait, baby producing, isn't that the way you're supposed to say it now? Menstruating persons. Okay, menstruating persons, it's different. So there's a higher percentage where before your hormones get thrown out of whack. So we see this, a good example of this in nature is your competitive gymnasts or competitive ballet dancers. As they go into puberty, they end up having a negative response. They don't grow as well. Their menstruation is delayed. As well as a lot of other physio, but those are the two main ones, because they've run into a developmental period in their life at too low of a body fat percentage, and that has effects down the road. And most of them recover from them, but if they stay competitive for a long time, it does have some major effects down the road. So body composition.
We've gone far afield from flexibility and mobility, which is one of my favorite topics.
Oh, I jumped to body composition to try to get everything in there, but
okay.
Okay, go ahead and say something on flexibility, mobility, and then I'll put it all together.
It's another one of those false dichotomies of people who either think it's not necessary or who spend way too much time on it. It's a component. Are you able to bend down and tie your shoes without going, ugh, Okay, if that's what you do, then you need to work on that. It needs to be a component, and the reason it's separate, flexibility and mobility, is because it's more than just, and we can't go into it here because it's a rather complicated topic, but it's more than just bending down and touching your toes and doing some static stretching after you work out. That
Yes.
is a component, but the mobility part of it is more than that.
Well, let's do our next fitness lecture on uh, building a good training session,
Okay.
and that'll be a good place to put that in there. So building a good training session will be our next. I think we might alternate. We'll do our societal
Yeah.
discussions and then fitness based discussions, because I mean I could go on
Yep. Yep. Yep.
for years on this. So, but let's put it together. So the main thing with today's talk is we've got these 5 components to physical fitness. And if you're wanting to make your body as optimal as it can be, you have to address all of them. And you have to realize that like you said, there is no, there's only trade-offs. Any emphasis in one or the other is going to take away from something else in there. Too much volume training will in effect play against your cardiovascular endurance, because you also get good at running your anaerobic system. So now you go for a jog, you start building up lactic acid faster because your body goes anaerobic first, and or you just have more muscle mass, so it makes you less efficient for that 10-mile jog because you have more weight behind it. But if you don't have enough muscle mass, you're pounding those legs and those joints with no protection. So they work for each other and they can work against each other. Strength is mostly neurological, which means it's the nervous system. At least your initial gains from it, because it's more muscles firing at the same time. But again, you power lift for 5 weeks and you get really good at picking something up one time, and then you jog and the muscles fire the same as picking up something one time, you're going to get tired really fast because everything's firing at once. Whereas when you jog all the time, your body gets really good at only firing as many fibers as it needs to keep you going over a long period of time to conserve energy. But then you get really bad at picking one thing up one time. So you address them all, and then the interplay, if you address them all equally, the interplay tends to work towards a little bit of optimization. But then you can take the most overused principle of fitness is individuality. Anybody who says everybody's different is either trying to not do something they don't want to do or trying to get you to do something they want you to do. Everybody is different, but it's not as different as you would think. And so most of the differences, other than body shape for the biomechanics part, since that's the part you like, other than body shape, most of the difference is preference. For 90% of the human race, big difference is preference. In that 10%, then you got your extremes. So, the mountain is obviously different than,
Yeah.
than an Ironman runner. So the extremes, you see that difference big enough, because people tend to look to the extremes. They think everybody, all us normal people, have this huge shift in what's different. There's going to be some muscle fiber difference, but there's a bell curve to it. Most of us are sitting right in the middle. And you tend to be a little bit better at one thing or a little bit worse at another, but at the same time, it's trainable in either direction. If you were one of those extremes, if you didn't find your sport, I'm sorry, dude, that was bad luck on your part.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we have a term if you're actually one of those exceptions to the rules, special populations. Okay,
right.
I'm a special population because some of the things we talk about as general rules, I have trouble with because I have calcification and bulging discs and narrowing all in my spine, especially my lumbar and my cervical and upper thoracic spine. So I have issues with some of these things, and it's why I have to put more focus in the mobility part, because if I don't, then I can't bend down and tie my shoes without going, ugh.
Well, I'll give you the opposite extreme is I was extremely flexible going into my strength training career. I could throw my foot behind my head pretty easily. So I was one of those, if I was an athlete, the vertical jump Bible breaks them into two groups. It's your stiff athletes, your strength athletes, and your springy athletes. And the stiff athletes obviously are too stiff, but they gain a lot of power from that because they have big, strong, stable muscles that generate force. Whereas your springy athletes, they're like a whip. They're like a wrecking ball. And that's why they're able to generate power. But both extremes are a high injury risk for completely opposite reasons. And you try to bring your athlete somewhere in the middle. Well, so with regular populations, you find where is my person on that spectrum? Is it a little shift this way? Is it a big shift this way? And for most of us, again, because genetically we're not an extreme for the most part, it's lifestyle or injuries, like in your case, or something along the way. As we age, everybody's got something over 25, right? So now I can take a general principle that is successful and shift it slightly for my person or my athlete. And then you put all those 5 components together. Well, now I can take my person. So I have a good, well-rounded body, but they've been only jogging for 20 years. Well, obviously they're going to have a greater degree of cardiovascular endurance versus muscular strength. So now I can create a program that shifts that cardiovascular focus down and that strength up without ignoring the cardiovascular purpose, because I want them to keep a lot of what they had there. And so I don't have to spend as much time on it, but I still do. Versus saying, oh, let's only work on strength and ignore that. Again, it's just shifts one way or the other. Even if I have an extreme athlete, I'm not going to ignore what they're great at. I'm just going to spend more time on some of the things they need. And so individuality isn't as big a change as a lot of people think. Again, in 90% of situations, there are some considerations that end up throwing things off. Well, type 1 diabetic is a good example. Type 1 diabetic versus a type 2. Type 1 diabetic, we've got different considerations around their diet and their exercise program because they have to pump in artificial insulin. And the timing of that is kind of crucial because one thing bodybuilders do to gain mass is they pump themselves full of insulin after their workout. So all the nutrients they just took in go straight to the muscles and they go, whoop. You kind of don't want to do that with a normal person. So it's not very healthy. And you're especially your females that want to have a physique, you don't want to train them artificially like a bodybuilder. So that's my spiel on individuality. It's lazy coaching.
Well, and I think that's why we need to wrap it up here, and that's a good place to probably wrap it up for this time, and then next time we can get into to more specifics of actually construct your program.
We'll take you through a good training day, and then we'll tell you how you can adjust that around your goals and the little things that are your individuality. I think that would be a good start, and then formulate some questions about that. And anybody who watches this, man, ask us questions, give us material. We can just rant on our own stuff, or we can talk about what you want to talk about. So
yeah, especially when it comes to fitness stuff, we can definitely answer questions, and there's so much crap out there that you should have questions.
Yeah. I think just talking out loud to whoever's watching in the audience and to you, I think when we start thinking of things like going live, I think we'll start with the fitness stuff. And that way we can get live questions in the chat and stuff like that. Because that will keep it organic and again, keep it specific to our audience as well. So as usual, talk to each other, be nice to each other, look at the big picture versus just that thing that triggered you.
Look to the better angels of your nature, not the bitterness, the tribalness, the regressive parts of what makes us lizard humans, but actual humans.
Yep. Don't let them book your elephant and train your elephant, because if you don't train your elephant, someone else will use it.
Right.
All right.
All right. Talk to y'all later.
Later.